HMS Royal Oak was one of 5 Revenge-class battleships built for the Royal Navy during the First World War. Launched in 1914 and completed in 1916, Royal Oak first saw combat of the Battle of Jutland as part of the Grand Fleet. In peacetime, she served in the Atlantic, home and Mediterranean fleets, more than once coming under accidental attack. The ship drew worldwide attention in 1928 when her senior officers were controversially court-martialed. Attempts to modernize Royal Oak throughout her 25-year career could not fix her fundamental lack of speed, and by the start of the Second World War, she was no longer suited to frontline duty. On 14 October 1939, Royal Oak was anchored at Scarpeflow in Orkney, Scotland, when she was torpedoed by the German submarine U-47 of Royal Oak's complement of 1,234 men and boys. 833 were killed that night or died later of their wounds. The loss of the outdated ship, the first of the 5 Royal Navy battleships and battlecruisers sunk in the Second World War, did little to affect the numerical superiority enjoyed by the British Navy and its allies. But the sinking had considerable effect on wartime morale. The raid made an immediate celebrity and war hero out of the U-boat commander, Gunther Prien, who became the first German submarine officer to be awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Before the sinking of Royal Oak, the Royal Navy had considered the naval base at Scarpeflow impregnable to submarine attack, and U-47's raid demonstrated that the German Navy was capable of bringing the war to British home waters. The shock resulted in rapid changes to Dockland security and the construction of the Churchill barriers around Scarpeflow. The wreck of Royal Oak, a designated war grave, lies almost upside down in 100 feet of water with her hull 16 feet beneath the surface. In an annual ceremony to mark the loss of the ship, Royal Navy divers place a white ensign underwater at her stern. Unauthorized divers are prohibited from approaching the wreck at any time under the Protection of Military Remains Act 1986. Design and description. The Revenge-class ships were designed as slightly smaller, slower, and more heavily protected versions of the preceding Queen Elizabeth-class battleships. As an economy measure, they were intended to revert to the previous practice of using both fuel oil and coal. But First Sea Lord Jackie Fisher rescinded the decision for coal in October 1914. Still under construction, the ships were redesigned to employ oil-fired boilers that increased the power of the engines by 9,000 shaft horsepower over the original specification. Royal Oak had a length overall of 620 feet 7 inches, a beam of 88 feet 6 inches and a deep draft of 33 feet 7 inches. She had a design displacement of 27,790 long tons and displaced 31,130 long tons at deep load. She was powered by 2 sets of Parsons steam turbines, each driving 2 shafts, using steam from 18 Yarrow boilers. The turbines were rated at 40,000 shp and intended to reach a maximum speed of 23 knots. During her sea trials on the 22nd of May 1916, the ship only reached a top speed of 22 knots from 40,360 shp. She had a range of 7,000 nautical miles at a cruising speed of 10 knots. Her crew numbered 909 officers and enlisted men in 1916. The Revenge class was equipped with 8 breech-loading 15-inch Mki guns in 4 twin-gun turrets, in 2 superfiring pairs fore and aft of the superstructure, designated A, B, X, and Y, from front to rear. 12 of the 14 BL 6-inch Mk12 guns were mounted in casemates along the broadside of the vessel amidships. The remaining pair were mounted on the shelter deck and were protected by gun shields. Their anti-aircraft armament consisted of 2 quick-firing 3-inch 20 hundredweight Mki guns. The ships were fitted with 4 submerged 21-inch torpedo tubes, 2 on each broadside. Royal Oak was completed with 2 fire control directors fitted with 15-foot rangefinders. One was mounted above the conning tower, protected by an armored hood, and the other was in the spotting top above the tripod foremast. Each turret was also fitted with a 15-foot rangefinder. The main armament could be controlled by X turret as well. The secondary armament was primarily controlled by directors mounted on each side of the compass platform on the foremast once they were fitted in. March 1917. A torpedo control director with a 15-foot rangefinder was mounted at the aft end of the superstructure. The ship's waterline belt consisted of Krupp cemented armor that was 13 inches thick between A and Y barbets and thinned to 4 to 6 inches towards the ship's ends, but did not reach either the bow or the stern. Above this was a strake of armor 6 inches thick that extended between A and X barbets. Transverse bulkheads 4 to 6 inches thick ran at an angle from the ends of the thickest part of the waterline belt to A and Y barbets. The gun turrets were protected by 11 to 13 inches of KC armor, except for the turret roofs which were 4.75–5 inches thick. The barbets ranged in thickness from 6 to 10 inches above the upper deck, but were only 4 to 6 inches thick below it. The Revenge-class ships had multiple armor decks that ranged from 1 to 4 inches in thickness. The main conning tower had 13 inches of armor on the sides with a 3-inch roof. The torpedo director in the rear superstructure had 6 inches of armor protecting it. After the Battle of Jutland, 1 inch of high-tensile steel was added to the main deck over the magazines and additional anti-flash equipment was added in the magazines. The ship was fitted with flying-off platforms mounted on the roofs of B and X turrets in 1918, from which fighters and reconnaissance aircraft could launch. Major alterations. Royal Oak was extensively refitted between 1922 and 1924, when her anti-aircraft defenses were upgraded by replacing the original 3-inch AA guns with a pair of QF 4-inch MKVAA guns. A 30-foot rangefinder was fitted in B turret and a simple high-angle rangefinder was added above the bridge. Underwater protection improved by the addition of anti-torpedo bulges. They were designed to reduce the effect of torpedo detonations and improve stability at the cost of widening the ship's beam by over 13 feet. They increased her beam to 102 feet 1 inch, reduced her draft to 29 feet 6 inches, increased her metacentric height to 6.3 feet at deep load, and all of the changes to her equipment increased her crew to a total of 1,188. Despite the bulges, she was able to reach a speed of 21.75 knots. A brief refit in early 1927 saw the addition of 2 more 4-inch AA guns and the removal of the 6-inch guns from the shelter deck. About 1931, a high-angle control system MKI director replaced the high-angle rangefinder on the spotting top. 2 years later, the aft pair of torpedo tubes were removed. The ship received a final refit between 1934 and 1936. When her deck armor was increased to 5 inches over the magazines and to 3.5 inches over the engine rooms. In addition to a general modernization of the ship's systems, her anti-aircraft defenses were strengthened by replacing the single mounts of the AA guns with twin mounts for the QF 4-inch Mark 16 gun and adding a pair of octuple mounts for 2-pounder Mk8 pom-pom guns to sponsons abreast the funnel. 2 positions for pom-pom anti-aircraft directors were added on new platforms abreast and below the fire control director in the spotting top. A HACS Mk3 director replaced the Mki in the spotting top and another replaced the torpedo director aft. A pair of quadruple mounts for Vickers 50 machine guns were added abreast the conning tower. The mainmast was reconstructed as a tripod to support the weight of a radio direction finding office and a second high-angle control station. The forward pair of submerged torpedo tubes were removed and 4 experimental 21-inch torpedo tubes were added above water forward of a turret. Construction and service. Royal Oak was laid down at Devonport Royal Dockyard on 15 January 1914. She was launched on 17 November, and after fitting out, was commissioned on 1 May 1916 at a final cost of £2,468,269. Named after the oak tree in which Charles II hid following his defeat of the 1651 Battle of Worcester. She was the 8th vessel to bear the name Royal Oak, replacing a pre-dreadnought scrapped in 1914. First World War. Upon completion, Royal Oak was assigned to the 3rd Division of the 4th Battle Squadron of the Grand Fleet and engaged the German High Seas Fleet in the Battle of Jutland. Under the command of Captain Crawford McLaughlin, Royal Oak left Scapa Flow on the evening of 30 May in the company of the battleships Superb, Canada and Admiral Jellicoe's flagship Iron Duke. The next day's indecisive battle saw Royal Oak fire a total of 38 15-inch and 84 6-inch shells, claiming 3 hits on the battlecruiser HMS Derfflinger, putting one of its turrets out of action, and a hit on the cruiser HMS Wiesbaden. She avoided damage herself, despite being straddled by shell fire on one occasion. Following the battle, Royal Oak was reassigned to the 1st Battle Squadron. On 5 November 1918, the final week of the First World War, she was anchored off Burnt Island in the Firth of Forth accompanied by the seaplane tender Campania and the light battle cruiser Glorious. A sudden force 10 squall caused Campania to drag her anchor, collide with Royal Oak and then with Glorious. Both capital ships suffered only minor damage. Campania, however, was hulled by her initial collision with Royal Oak. The ship's engine rooms flooded, and she settled by the stern and sank 5 hours later, though without loss of life. At the end of the First World War, Royal Oak escorted several vessels of the surrendering German High Seas Fleet from the Firth of Forth to their internment in Scapa Flow, and was present at a ceremony in Pentland Firth to greet other ships as they followed. Between the wars, the peacetime reorganization of the Royal Navy assigned Royal Oak to the 2nd Battle Squadron of the Atlantic Fleet. Modernized by the 1922-24 refit, she was transferred in 1926 to the Mediterranean Fleet, based in Grand Harbour, Malta. In early 1928, this duty saw the notorious incident the contemporary press dubbed the Royal Oak Mutiny. What began as a simple dispute between Rear Admiral Bernard Collard and Royal Oak's 2 senior officers, Captain Kenneth Dewar and Commander Henry Daniel, over the band at the ship's wardroom dance, descended into a bitter personal feud that spanned several months. Dewar and Daniel accused Collard of vindictive fault-finding, and openly humiliating and insulting him before their crew. In return, Collard countercharged the two with failing to follow orders and treating him worse than a midshipman. When Dewar and Daniel wrote letters of complaint to Collard's superior, Vice Admiral John Kelly, he immediately passed him on to the Commander-in-Chief Admiral Sir Roger Keyes. On realizing that the relationship between the two and their flag admiral had irretrievably broken down, Keyes removed all 3 from their posts and sent them back to England, postponing a major naval exercise. The press picked up on the story worldwide, describing the affair, with some hyperbole, as a mutiny. Public attention reached such proportions as to raise the concerns of the King, who summoned First Lord of the Admiralty William Bridgeman for an explanation. For their letters of complaint, Dewar and Daniel were controversially charged with writing subversive documents. In a pair of highly publicized courts-martial, both were found guilty and severely reprimanded, leading Daniel to resign from the Navy. Collard himself was criticized for the excesses of his conduct by the press and in Parliament, and on being denounced by Bridgeman as unfitted to hold further high command, was forcibly retired from service. Of the three, only Duo escaped with his career, albeit a damaged one. He remained in the Royal Navy, but in a series of more minor commands. His promotion to Rear Admiral, which would normally have been a formality, was delayed until the following year, just one day before his retirement. Daniel attempted a career in journalism, but when this and other ventures were unsuccessful, he disappeared into obscurity amid poor health in South Africa. Collard retreated to private life and never spoke publicly of the incident again. The scandal proved an embarrassment to the reputation of the Royal Navy, then still the world's largest, and it was satirized at home and abroad through editorials, cartoons, and even a comic jazz oratorio composed by Erwin Schulhoff. One consequence of the damaging affair was an undertaking from the Admiralty to review the means by which naval officers might bring complaints against the conduct of their superiors. Spanish Civil War. During the Spanish Civil War, Royal Oak was tasked with conducting non-intervention patrols around the Iberian Peninsula. On such a patrol and steaming some 30 nautical miles east of Gibraltar on the 2nd of February 1937, she came under aerial attack by 3 aircraft of the Republican forces. They dropped 3 bombs within 3 cables of the starboard bow, though causing no damage. The British Chargé d'Affaires protested the incident to the Republican government, which admitted its error and apologized for the attack. Later that same month, while stationed off Valencia on the 23rd of February 1937 during an aerial bombardment by the Nationalists, she was accidentally struck by an anti-aircraft shell fired from a Republican position. 5 men were injured, including Royal Oak's captain, B. Drew. On this occasion, however, the British elected not to protest to the Republicans, deeming the incident an act of God. In May 1937, she and HMS Forester escorted SS Habana, a liner carrying Basque child refugees, to England. In July, as the war in northern Spain flared up, Royal Oak, along with the battleship HMS Resolution, rescued the steamer Gordonia when Spanish nationalist warships attempted to capture her off Santander. She was however unable on 14 July to prevent the seizure of the British freighter Moulton by the Spanish nationalist cruiser Almirante Cervera while trying to enter Santander. The merchantman had been engaged in the evacuation of refugees. This same period saw Royal Oak star alongside 14 other Royal Navy vessels in the 1937 British film melodrama Our Fighting Navy, the plot of which centers around a coup in the fictional South American Republic of Bianco. Royal Oak portrays a rebel battleship Almirante, whose commander forces a British captain into choosing between his lover and his duty. The film was poorly received by critics, but gained some redemption through its dramatic scenes of naval action. Second World War. In 1938, Royal Oak returned to the home fleet and was made flagship of the 2nd Battle Squadron based in Portsmouth. On 24 November 1938, she returned the body of the British-born Queen Maud of Norway, who had died in London, to a state funeral in Oslo, accompanied by her husband King Haakon VII. Paying off in December 1938, Royal Oak was recommissioned the following June, and in the late summer of 1939 embarked on a short training cruise in the English Channel in preparation for another 30-month tour of the Mediterranean, for which her crew were pre-issued tropical uniforms. As hostilities loomed, the battleship was instead dispatched north to Scapa Flow, and was at anchor there when war was declared on 3 September. The next few weeks proved uneventful, but in October 1939 Royal Oak joined the search for the German battleship Gneisenau, which had been ordered into the North Sea as a diversion for the commerce-raiding heavy cruisers Deutschland and Admiral Graf's P. The search was ultimately fruitless, particularly for Royal Oak, whose top speed, by then less than 20 knots, was inadequate to keep up with the rest of the fleet. On 12 October, Royal Oak returned to the defences of Scapa Flow in poor shape, battered by North Atlantic storms. Many of her Kali floats had been smashed and several of the smaller caliber guns rendered inoperable through flooding. The mission had underlined the obsolescence of the 25-year-old warship. Concerned that a recent overflight by German reconnaissance aircraft heralded an imminent air attack upon Scapa Flow, Admiral of the Home Fleet Charles Forbes ordered most of the fleet to disperse to safer ports. Royal Oak remained behind, her anti-aircraft guns still deemed a useful addition to Scapa's otherwise scanty air defenses.